Because I think a lot of people in Cleveland are still trying to separate the headlines and the social media image from who Shedeur is exactly as a man and a teammate.
He don't understand that he could walk in a room with anybody and they're gonna know who he is.
You know, there's a perception that from somebody looking in that to some, Shedeur Sanders has lived a cushy life, has lived a life of luxury.
He doesn't know how influential he is.
The media didn't miss the Shedeur Sanders story. They manufactured it, and Coach Prime just made them pay for it in front of everybody. And let's be precise about what happened here. Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, one of the most media-savvy human beings to ever exist on this planet. A man who has been in front of cameras since before most of your favorite sports journalists were born, chose a YouTube creator over every major legacy outlet to tell the real story about his son. He didn't slip up. He didn't default to it. He made a deliberate, calculated decision. He picked an independent voice named G. Bush and handed him the access, the candor, and the receipts that ESPN, NFL Network, The Athletic, and every other outlet with a press credential and a production budget never bothered to go find.
This is what we do. It's not that we're trying to show out a showboat. This is how it was. Like if you pull up videos when he was 12 and 10, it was that. Like that's where we come from. That's how he was exposed, and that's what it was for him.
Let that sit with you for a second, because this isn't just a feel-good story about a creator getting a big get. This is an indictment. This is Coach Prime looking directly at the establishment sports media machine and saying, on the record, with his actions, you failed. You didn't do the work. You built a story without earning it, and you don't deserve the correction. Now let's talk about what that lazy work actually looked like, because this is where it gets ugly. The narrative the legacy outlets ran with Shedeur Sanders was never really about football. Think about the coverage cycle. What were the recurring hooks? The jewelry, the Instagram presence, the lifestyle content, the aesthetic. Every time Shedeur Sanders appeared in a headline from a major outlet, the framing came preloaded with a specific kind of skepticism.
So that was like a badge of honor when he could rope up or chain up or link up, and then he turned the gold to diamonds. Like that's where we come from, man. So you can't fault a man for understanding where he came from, and that was the come up.
The kind that gets dressed up as analysis but is actually just character insinuation. Is he focused enough? Is he too flashy? Does he have the right mentality? Is the brand bigger than the football? And here's the thing, none of those outlets did the actual reporting to answer those questions. They didn't sit down and ask the hard questions. They didn't go find the people in the program who could speak to Shedeur's work ethic, his preparation, his film study, his leadership in the locker room. They didn't go earn the access that would let them confirm or deny the narrative they were already building. They just kept feeding the aesthetic back to their audience and letting the insinuation do the work for them. That's not journalism. That's not analysis. That's recycling a character frame because it generates engagement, and it requires zero accountability because it's technically never stated outright.
That in our neighborhood, in our inner city, see, you getting caught up in thinking how he grew up. He didn't grow up with no silver spoon. He didn't grow up with no credit cards. You know, I took him to the other side of town, man. He grew up in South Dallas. Yeah, he grew up playing ball against us.
It's always implied. It's always in the framing. And that's exactly why it's so dangerous and exactly why it's so cowardly. You want to know what's actually cowardly? It's not a quarterback who wears chains and posts on Instagram. It's a media ecosystem that builds a narrative around a young man's character without ever doing the work to verify it. Because verifying it might mean killing the story, and the story is too profitable to kill. This is the part that should make you furious as someone who actually watches football, because you're out here doing the work. You're watching the tape. You're breaking down the footwork, the progressions, the pocket presence, the decision-making under pressure. You're following the actual football. And the outlets that are supposed to be doing that at a professional level, with full-time staff, production resources, insider access, are running lifestyle insinuation pieces about a quarterback's jewelry, while calling it evaluation. And Coach Prime saw all of it.
We went to the hood. We went to go get it. We had to compete. They had to be tough. Backing down from that, man. He ain't had no silver spoon. He had access to platinum spoons, but we didn't use them.
Every single piece of it. Understand who Deion Sanders is in this context. This is not a man who is naive about how media works. This is a man who has lived inside the media machine at the highest level for decades. He knows how access journalism operates. He knows how narrative gets built. He knows exactly what it means when a reporter frames a question a certain way. or when a headline gets written with a particular word choice, or when the same visual gets used over and over again to illustrate a specific kind of story. He has been studied by media. He has been covered by media. He has been misrepresented by media. He knows the game. So when Coach Prime looked at what was being written about Shedeur, the character insinuations, the lifestyle framing, the implication that the Instagram presence was evidence of some kind of focus problem, he didn't get surprised, he got strategic. He didn't call a press conference. He didn't go on First Take and have a debate. He didn't grant an exclusive to the outlet that had been running the narrative so they could launder it with a quote from him. He went around all of it. He went directly to G. Bush, an independent YouTube creator, and gave him the access and the candor that the legacy outlets had already demonstrated they didn't deserve.
There was no level of entitlement. There's no level of, we talk about all the conspiracy theories and all this stuff. Look, like we can end a lot of these conspiracy theories about him being the most entitled guy in the room, the guy who's running around telling people, the guy who's running around with all this, hey, I'm disrespecting my authority figures.
Think about what that means from a power and credibility standpoint. G. Bush is not backed by a network. G. Bush doesn't have a PR team and a legal department softening every question. G. Bush is a YouTube creator who built an audience by actually caring about the truth of a story, by doing the work, by being willing to ask the questions that matter and let the subject speak without a narrative preloaded around the answer. And Coach Prime recognized that. He recognized the difference between a creator who comes in genuinely trying to understand the truth and a media outlet that comes in trying to confirm what it already decided to write. That distinction matters enormously, and the fact that one of the most famous football figures on the planet is now making that distinction openly with his access decisions should be a 5-alarm fire inside every legacy sports media newsroom in the country. But it won't be, because the legacy outlets have too much invested in the old model to honestly reckon with what just happened. Here's what actually got handed to G. Bush in that access. Coach Prime gave him the receipts, the real character evidence, the stuff that never made it into the profile pieces and the draft evaluation segments and the talking head debates about whether Shedeur Sanders was mentally ready for the NFL. The access that revealed the difference between the narrative those outlets were running and the actual human being at the center of it. Now, I want you to think about the layers of that, because it's not just that the coverage was wrong, it's that the coverage was wrong in a specific direction. The character skepticism that got built around Shedeur Sanders didn't emerge from reporting. It emerged from optics. It emerged from a surface-level read of a young man's public persona, filtered through a media lens that has a long and ugly history of treating confident, stylish, outspoken black quarterbacks with a specific kind of skepticism that never quite gets applied the same way to other players.
Because when you start to add it up and you continue to add it up, from what we're talking about in terms of whether or not what his character is like. He was the same person that said, hey, even when Kevin Stefanski was still the coach, he said, you want me to say something bad about my coach? I think that's disrespectful.
I'm not going to hedge around that. You're serious football fans. You've watched this long enough to know what the pattern looks like. You've watched how certain quarterbacks get covered. You've watched how certain storylines get built. You know how the framing works. And you know that when the jewelry becomes the story instead of the football, something is being chosen. Something is being decided about what this player's story is going to be. And it isn't always driven by the tape. The legacy outlets built a character narrative around Shedeur Sanders. They built it on aesthetics. They didn't verify it with access. They didn't do the reporting that would have given them the standing to make character claims. They just ran it because it was an easy story, because it got clicks, because the aesthetic gave them the visual hooks they needed, and because nobody was going to hold them accountable for implication. Coach Prime held them accountable, not with a statement, not with a complaint, not by going on television and airing grievances. He held them accountable by simply removing them from the equation and giving the real story to someone who actually wanted to find it. That is the most devastating kind of accountability that exists in media. It doesn't involve arguing. It doesn't involve giving the opposition a platform to defend itself. It just makes the old model irrelevant, directly, quietly, and permanently. And G. Bush, the independent YouTube creator who put in the work and built the credibility, got the story the legacy outlets should have gotten years ago. Let's zoom out for a second, because this matters beyond just Shedeur Sanders. What happened here is a signal. It's a signal about where sports media credibility is actually located right now, and it's not where the institution thinks it is. The outlets with the credentials and the budgets and the broadcast deals have been coasting on structural authority for a long time. They've been operating on the assumption that access flows to them because of what they represent. And what Coach Prime just demonstrated is that access flows to trust. Access flows to the people who have actually shown with their work that they are going to engage honestly with the subject in front of them. G. Bush earned that. The legacy outlets didn't. And now everybody can see it.
You know, no matter what happened with football, hey, Shedeur Sanders, his career will tell you what his career is going to be based on what he does on the football field. Not only is Shedeur Sanders a good person, he might be a better person than I thought he was. And that's saying a lot, because I thought he was already a tremendous person inside and out. And
that should change how every young journalist thinks about what their job actually is. It should change how outlets think about the narratives they're building and whether they've earned the right to build them. It should change how NFL players and coaches think about who they give their time to and why, because Coach Prime just modeled something. He modeled the idea that the creator who shows up with genuine curiosity and actual respect for the truth is more valuable than the outlet with the largest distribution. If that outlet has already demonstrated it isn't going to find the story, it's only going to confirm the one it already wrote. The media missed everything about Shedeur Sanders because they weren't looking. They had a frame. They had a story. The jewelry was in the story. The Instagram was in the story. The character skepticism was in the story, and they ran with it. Coach Prime just proved, with a camera and a YouTube creator and the receipts they never went looking for, that the story was wrong, that the character they were implying never matched the person, and that the people who built it never did the work to know the difference. That's not a media criticism. That's a verdict. And the verdict isn't close. The legacy outlets didn't miss the story because it was hard to find. They missed it because they already decided what it was. And the next time they come for a player's character on the back of nothing but aesthetics and implication, remember this moment. Remember that Coach Prime saw through it, went around it, and gave the truth to someone who actually wanted it. That's what accountability looks like, and it didn't come from inside the building. Now think about what this cost Shedeur Sanders in real, tangible football terms, because the media narrative doesn't just live in the discourse, it bleeds into the evaluation process. When scouts are talking to each other, when front office personnel are trading impressions, when the pre-draft character grades are getting assembled, those rooms are not operating in a vacuum. They read what gets written. They watch what gets aired. They absorb the framing. And when the dominant frame around a quarterback prospect for 18 months is a character question dressed up as analysis, that contaminates the evaluation. It doesn't matter that it was never sourced. It doesn't matter that nobody did the reporting to back it up. Repetition becomes perceived consensus, and perceived consensus inside a draft room is worth millions of dollars in contract value and draft positioning. That's not hypothetical. That is exactly how prospect narratives have shaped draft outcomes for decades. The media narrative around Shedeur Sanders had real stakes attached to it, which means the failure to report it honestly had real consequences, and the outlets that built the narrative without earning it will never own that damage, because they never stated anything outright. That's the design. Implication gives you the story and the exit at the same time, and that's precisely what makes what Coach Prime did so important. He didn't just correct the record for his son's reputation. He interrupted the feedback loop before it could fully close. He put real evidence in front of an audience that was ready to receive it, through a creator who had earned enough credibility to make it land. He changed what the baseline information actually is for anyone willing to go look. The legacy outlets built a frame. Coach Prime replaced it with footage, and footage beats framing every single time if someone actually lets it run. That's the part the old model still hasn't figured out. You can't survive on structural authority in an environment where the audience can go directly to the source and the source can choose who gets to be the vehicle. The gatekeeping only works if the gate still means something. And right now in sports media, that gate is held open by nothing but habit. If you want analysis that actually respects your football IQ, Huddle Files is where you belong. No media narratives, no hot takes without receipts. Just the film, the facts, and the truth about what's really happening inside these organizations. Subscribe and hit the bell. The next breakdown is already in progress.